everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Katie, otherwise known as the Vintage Academic, and I am a recent graduate of UC Berkeley. I was a transfer student and I just recently graduated like a couple of days ago with a degree in anthropology. I am an academic lifestyle content creator where I talk about the community college to four-year transfer process, as well as documenting my personal journey as a student who is now headed to New York City for graduate school. Today, I want to talk about some of the reasons why I didn't want to go to UC Berkeley. So again, as a student who just recently graduated from Berkeley, I have talked a lot about my reasons behind wanting to go to UC Berkeley for my undergraduate degree. And now that I am a graduate of Berkeley, I thought now would be a great time to sit down and reflect on some of the reasons why I didn't want to go to Cal, some of the reasons why I hesitated before accepting my offer of admission, and reflect on whether or not those reasons were warranted, and talk about how things actually ended up turning out for me in my 2 years at Berkeley. All right, we're just gonna go ahead and jump right into it. The first reason was the cost. Here's the issue. UC Berkeley is expensive. For a public university, UC Berkeley's cost of attendance, like its tuition and estimated cost of things like books and health insurance, that kind of stuff, is pretty pricey. I think one thing that people maybe sometimes kind of forget about is the fact that UC Berkeley is in the state of California, where everything is just a little bit more expensive. But even within California, the cost of, say, going to a CSU versus the cost of going to a UC is vastly different. I think my tuition is something like twice that of the tuition at a place like CSU Sacramento. Yeah, the cost of attendance here is very expensive. I actually did make a video, you can go check it out in the links below, about how much money I actually spend to live and go to school at UC Berkeley. I talk about the cost of tuition, the cost of housing, my bills and my jobs, and I just break down the entire finances of going to a school like Berkeley. So if you want to watch that, check the video below. But the other thing that I want to talk about in terms of cost is the cost of living. Again, California is expensive, we all know this, but then there are certain areas of California that are more or less expensive than the other. Two of those places that are more expensive are places like SoCal, Los Angeles, where UCLA is, and then the Bay Area, where Berkeley is. San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, you know, that whole Bay Area is very expensive. For the studio apartment that I live in that I have to move out of in just a couple of weeks, I pay $17.50 a month to live in a studio apartment by myself. And yeah, so one of the reasons why I didn't want to go to Berkeley was the cost. My alternative was to go to UC Davis and continue living at home with my mother, which would have been significantly cheaper and saved me a lot of money in rent. However, Berkeley was the school for me, and the anthropology program at Berkeley offered more of the things that I wanted than the anthropology program at Davis. I also wanted to move away from Davis because I'd lived there my entire life, wanted to experience something new, and I also had just fallen in love with Berkeley and its campus and their professors I wanted to work with and their research opportunities. And yeah, I would say UC Davis's anthropology program is much more like biological anthropology leaning versus Berkeley's, which was much more sociocultural and archaeological, and that was what I wanted. But the question is, did my hesitation about the cost actually pan out? Let me clear something up. My financial situation as a student is unique, I'll put it. So you guys know the FAFSA, right? The free application for federal student aid. That is the application that you fill out in order to get federal financial aid, such as the Pell Grant or the California Grant or federal subsidized loans. But the thing about the FAFSA is that you have to report your parents' taxes on your FAFSA up until the age of 23. When I was in community college, it took me a really long time to get through community college, and I ended up transferring to UC Berkeley after I had hit the age of 23, meaning that I no longer had to report my parents' taxes on my FAFSA, and being someone who had a job at the time that only paid something like $12,000 a year, I was considered a low-income student, which made more financial aid funding available to me. So I ended up receiving things like the Pell Grant, the California Grant, and I also ended up getting some merit-based scholarships. One of the things I really liked about Berkeley, and one of the reasons why I chose them, is because they do their best to mitigate the cost of going to school at a place like Berkeley. They offered me the largest financial aid package out of all of the UCs that I applied to, and there's also options for things like merit-based scholarships, like I said before. So in the end, my fears weren't really realized. It's still very expensive to live here, and it's expensive to even do things like get groceries, but I have had the opportunity to take advantage of some of the financial aid resources here at Berkeley. With each of these sections, I also want to provide a little bit of like a recommendation or a reflection on what things you could possibly do if you're worried about the same things. So here are my recommendations if you're worried about the cost of going to Berkeley. The first one is go to community college. At community college, you can get the first 2 years, if you're here in California at least, for free, because I know a lot of the California community colleges now offer your first 2 years or equivalent thereof for free. You don't have to pay anything in tuition. So that means that if you go to community college and then you transfer to a school like UC Berkeley, you only have to pay for 2 years worth of tuition, and that is what I did. I think that's one of the reasons why community college is super important and one of the reasons why I make videos about being a transfer student. In addition, if you need to take your time through community college like I did, great. Wait until you're 23 to go to a school like UC Berkeley. Age out of that parent tax reporting requirement. I personally am super glad that I waited until I was 23 to go to Berkeley because I got more financial aid. And I don't think having gone through college faster or at a younger age would have been worth the amount of money that I would have had to pay rather than getting financial aid. Another thing you can do is to submit a cost of attendance adjustment request, which is basically UC Berkeley estimates how much money they think that you're going to have to pay in order to attend and what your expected family contribution is. And if they get it totally wrong, or if you need an adjustment because you might be leaving a job to come to UC Berkeley or some other financial situation has arisen, you can always go to the financial aid office and request a cost of attendance adjustment. They basically reassess your financial situation, which has the opportunity to open up more financial aid options for you. The other thing you can do is definitely apply for scholarships. Even if you don't think you're going to get the scholarship, apply for it anyways. I have applied to plenty of scholarships that I didn't think I was going to get, and I got them. So the worst thing that can happen when you apply for a scholarship is that they tell you no. But the best thing that can happen is that they love your application and they want to give you money. I even received a scholarship that reduced my semester loan in half. Even if it's just like $300 or $500, that is still $300 or $500 worth of food or bills that you don't have to worry about now. Lastly, I would suggest taking some kind of like budgeting or personal finance class either while you're at community college, or Berkeley has educational services that help you learn about these kinds of things so that you can handle your budget better than I do, because I am not very good at it. In the end, the cost didn't end up being that stressful. That's not to say that it wasn't stressful, because it definitely was from time to time, but I ended up receiving financial aid, scholarships, and I also have 3 jobs, so I was able to pay my tuition and make ends meet long enough for me to stay here. Speaking of apartments, the second reason why I wasn't sure I wanted to go to UC Berkeley was housing. So I was really worried about not only finding housing in the Bay Area, but again, the cost of finding housing in the Bay Area. UC Berkeley, among many universities, is in a very densely populated area. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, there's a university there and it attracts a lot of students, so therefore the population is going to be more dense anyways. But in places that are already densely populated, like the Bay Area of California, housing becomes even more of an issue. UC Berkeley doesn't have a lot of space to expand into, which means that we have a limited number of options for building dorms, limited number of options for student apartments, and a lot of what students have to rely on when they come to Berkeley is finding a rental through some kind of private company and not through the university. Another thing that kind of scared me about Berkeley was that they don't offer guaranteed housing. They only offer guaranteed housing for your first year if you're a freshman, and not at all for transfer students, which is, I know, something that turns off a lot of people from Berkeley. So when I was looking for housing in the Bay Area, I went through a lot of different versions of what I thought would be my housing situation before I ultimately ended up being in this apartment. But let me walk you through some of those, because they are definitely awesome recommendations and solutions for finding housing in the Bay Area. The first one is you can apply to the dorms anyways. You can apply to the dorms and see if you get in. You most likely will get a placement, even if you're a transfer student, and on the dorm application, you can even tell them that you're a transfer student and that one of your preferences would be to be housed with other transfer students, etc. Additionally, we have some themed residential programs here at Berkeley. So there are some that are based on identity, and then there are also some that are for transfer students. Berkeley also does have university apartments. Additionally, there are the co-ops, and the co-ops are the ones that I really want to highlight, because if you're worried about the cost of housing in Berkeley, the co-ops are going to be a great option. So if you don't know, co-op stands for cooperative. So it's cooperative housing, which means that you get reduced rent in exchange for services. So basically you get a room or an apartment, depending on which co-op that you're in, for say $1,000 a month instead of $1,700, and that other $700 is made made up by you signing up for a cooking or a cleaning or a gardening shift, essentially contributing to the household or the community in some way. I think that it would be a fantastic option for any transfer student, especially because they are so community oriented and community based that if you're worried about making friends, the co-op might just be the perfect housing situation for you because there will be plenty of opportunity to build community. The third reason why I hesitated on going to Cal is because of the competitiveness and the academic rigor. So if you're like me, when you got into UC Berkeley as a transfer student, you spent a lot of time like going to admitted students' webinars and talking to current students and watching YouTube videos, trying to figure out exactly what a class at UC Berkeley was going to look like and how hard it was going to be. Because one of the issues of being a transfer student is that the four-year university, like the next step in thinking about upper division courses, is that it's just kind of like a big black box. You have no idea what it looks like, or at least I thought I didn't. So I was really worried that the classes were going to be super hard, or that I wouldn't be able to do all the readings, or that I was going to fail miserably. I was also worried that other students would be unfriendly or actively try to sabotage my grade. And the thing about Berkeley with its classes is that it really depends, and that's something I found out the hard way. Sometimes classes are really hard and sometimes classes really aren't, and that can depend on a multitude of factors. It can depend on your professor, it can depend on your major, it can depend on the college that your classes are in, it can depend on how many units your courses are. Like, there are so many factors that go into whether or not a course is going to be super rigorous that it's just impossible to tell. Personally, I have taken some very easy upper division courses, and I also have taken some really hard upper division courses. I think the same thing can be said for my community college experience though. I took some really easy lower division courses and some really hard lower division courses. I think that's just the nature of college and college courses, is that there's just so much variability you can't really say. I will say, however, that overall, big picture, I think Berkeley was easier than I thought it was going to be. Yeah, might be spilling a little bit of tea here. It could just be the fact that I'm an anthropology major and the anthropology professors are, very flexible and willing to work with you to ensure that you get the grade that they think you deserve. Yeah, I mean, that's been my experience. In addition to that, every single class, regardless of the department, has been super collaborative with students. We've always had group projects or even class-wide projects. I've written papers together with other students. I've studied with other students. I've even spent time studying with students outside of my major, so even when we had nothing in common. If you're worried about like the competitiveness between students, in my experience, it doesn't exist. I would say, however, that you should be aware of the kind of people that you're surrounding yourself with and choose to surround yourself with people who are going to want to work collaboratively and study together and support each other in actually learning the material. I've never once heard of anybody actually sabotaging a test or actually deleting somebody's notes. I just don't think people care that much. And the last thing that I want to say about academic rigor and competitiveness is that I did pick Berkeley for its academic rigor. I picked Berkeley because I knew that it had the reputation of producing really well-rounded, highly educated students, and I wanted to go to a school that would help me become a better student, to learn more about my major, to become a better writer, and basically prepare me for the next step in my educational career, which was going to be graduate school. So I wanted to go to a school that would challenge me, that would ensure that I was learning the material, and that I would come out the other side with the critical thinking, research, and writing skills to move on to the next step. The fourth reason why I didn't want to go to Berkeley is actually kind of a weird one, and it was my major. I was worried that the program wasn't going to be what I wanted it to be, or I was kind of worried that I was picking the wrong program. Because here's the thing about anthropology. Anthropology is one broad word for a discipline that is actually made up of 4 different subdisciplines. So underneath the umbrella of anthropology, you have sociocultural anthropology, biological anthropology, archaeology, and linguistics. And I wanted to become an archaeologist when I came into Berkeley. Some of the other UCs that I'd gotten into had archaeology specific degrees, and I was worried that I wasn't going to get the archaeological training at Berkeley that I would have gotten from a different UC in an archaeology specific major. But here's the catch. When I was speaking to my professors at community college and trying to figure out which UC I wanted to go to, my professor said to me, Katie, if you want to become an archaeologist, here in North America, archaeology is a subdiscipline of anthropology. It's called anthropological archaeology. So it's probably a better idea to get a degree in anthropology itself and then to niche down into archaeology either through grad school or field school or experience. But the benefit of doing an anthropology degree and not an archaeology specific one is that you have more flexibility if you change your mind, or you're more marketable if you decide that a different type of job is better for you. And that's ultimately what ended up happening, is that I'm not studying archaeology anymore, but that's a story for another time. So I heeded his advice and I went to UC Berkeley for anthropology. And here's the thing about degree programs. It kind of depends on which degree program you're talking about and what university you're at and what requirements are required of you, but there is usually some degree of flexibility within your degree program. So I have an anthropology degree, but many of the classes that I took have to do with archaeology or some version of archaeology or museum studies. Even then, when I decided that I didn't want to study archaeology anymore, I was able to take classes outside of my major in things like media studies and textile studies in order to better prepare myself for the program that I'm going to go into for my master's degree. So my recommendation for this one is to take a look at your program. Will you have some flexibility? Will you be able to play around with electives? Can you take classes outside of your major or your department? And what about the professors? Are the professors people you want to learn from? Are they doing really cool research? Just do a deep dive into the actual program at the university that you're thinking of going to, in this case Berkeley. Try to pinpoint the things that are going to be valuable to you in your degree program, and whether or not Berkeley has a degree program that's going to provide you with the things that you need in order to be successful in your next steps. Alright, and then the last reason, number 5, is location and safety. One of the issues that I had with Berkeley is that it was farther away from home than one of my other options, which was UC Davis, which again, I grew up in Davis and my family lives there, and I was a little concerned about being away from home. Not because I'm afraid of leaving, but because I do have some issues when it comes to health with certain family members. I want to be able to come home sooner rather than later if something happened and my family members needed me to be home. In addition to that, I also have a fiance who lives in Davis and goes to school in Sacramento, so going to school in Berkeley meant that I would be at least an hour and a half away from him and that I wouldn't get to see him as frequently as I wanted to. In addition to being farther away from family than I would have been had I gone to UC Davis, Berkeley is also a city. I grew up in Davis. Davis is rural compared to the Bay Area. My family literally lives across the street from a farm, if that gives you any idea. So I've spent my entire life in a relatively small, safe, uneventful agricultural town, and moving to a big city like Berkeley in the Bay Area where you are surrounded by big cities was a little daunting to me. Not to mention the fact that the bigger the city, typically the less safe it was, and I had seen some pretty scary horror stories on YouTube and Reddit about what living in Berkeley was like. But now that I've lived here for a year and a half, I can safely say that it's not as scary as it seems. Yes, it sucks to be away from my family, but they only live an hour and a half away, which means I can hop on the Berk bus, which goes between Davis's and Berkeley's campus, go home and see them. And then in terms of safety, I think that it just comes down to common sense. There's not a lot that you can do to stop other people from committing crimes, but there's a lot that you can do to keep yourself safe from the people who are committing the crimes. Things like use common sense, you know, be aware of your surroundings. If you're walking home at night, either walk with a friend or use what we call Bear Walk, which is a program where you can request that another student walks you home if you're feeling unsafe. Don't wear headphones at night so you can maintain situational awareness. I personally would call a friend and stay on the phone with my friend as I walked home so that she could make sure that I was in my house safe. In addition, Berkeley's actually pretty busy at night, and the more people are around, the safer I feel, because I feel like there's less chance of somebody doing something to me and getting away with it. So I personally have actually felt pretty safe as a seemingly single woman walking around campus, both in daytime and at nighttime. So yeah, I think that just about wraps up everything that I have to say. Basically, my takeaway from my 2 years of going to Berkeley and my like 1.5-ish year of having lived in Berkeley is that it's not as bad as you think it's gonna be. It's not as big and scary as people make it out to be. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you don't know what an experience is going to be like until you experience it. So you can watch all the YouTube videos and read all the Facebook and Reddit and blog posts you want, but until you actually take the dive and experience the thing, you're not gonna know. If you're thinking about whether or not you should go to Berkeley, I would highly recommend it. You can watch all of the other videos on my YouTube channel about the reasons why I love Berkeley, and it has most definitely been worth my time and my money. So I'm gonna wrap it up here. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. I will be recording a couple more videos about my experience at Berkeley before I move out and head to New York City for my master's program. So get those questions in while you can. I will do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe for more future academic videos. I can't say for future Berkeley videos anymore, but I'll definitely continue to talk about my experience as a student and academic as I go into grad school in New York. Anyways, I'm gonna stop rambling. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.